The thing in the sand. The sirens began just before sunset. Their metallic howl echoed across the mining colony of Kepri. 9 while workers abandoned drilling rigs and cargo loaders in confusion. Red emergency lights flashed across the outer walls as dust storms rolled through the desert beyond the settlement. Something had crashed in the dunes. Inside the security command tower, Commander Reth listened to the broken distress transmission with growing unease. Unknown vessel down 7 kilometers east, an operator reported. No transponder signal. Severe structural damage. Static crackled through the speakers. Then came screaming. Not panic, not confusion. Terror. It got out. A voice shouted desperately. Oh gods, it's inside. The transmission cut off abruptly. Silence filled the room. Commander Reth slowly stood. Response team with me. Full combat gear. Nobody argued. Minutes later, armored transports crossed the desert beneath darkening skies. Sand whipped against reinforced windows while the crashed ship appeared ahead like a jagged scar in the dunes. Even before stepping outside, the soldiers smelled blood. The vessel looked torn apart from within. Deep claw marks split the hull open while scattered debris surrounded the crater. Black scorch marks stained the sand. Reth exited first, pulse rifle raised carefully. Motion scanners active. Green beams swept across the wreckage. Nothing moved. One nervous guard pointed toward the cargo bay entrance. Sir, bodies covered the walls, or what remained of them. Armor plating had been ripped apart like paper. Blood dripped from overhead supports. Deep grooves cut through solid steel. Something incredibly strong had done this. The floodlights flickered suddenly, then died. Darkness swallowed the crater. Power failure, someone shouted. Motion trackers beeped wildly. A shadow moved across the top of the wrecked ship. Too fast to identify. The soldiers opened fire instantly. Blue pulse rounds lit the darkness while panicked voices echoed across the crash site. Then one guard disappeared. No scream. No warning. One moment standing beside them. The next simply gone. Something massive landed behind the convoy with enough force to shake the sand. The soldiers turned slowly. The Vorak emerged from the darkness. It was enormous. Black armored hide reflected faint moonlight, while hooked claws carved trenches into the ground. For glowing eyes fixed on the squad with cold intelligence. Its jaws opened slowly, revealing rows of curved teeth slick with blood. Fear slammed into the soldiers instantly. Not normal fear. Something unnatural. Cold panic flooded their nervous systems like poison. Several guards dropped their rifles immediately. One collapsed to his knees, trembling uncontrollably. Commander Reth tried to aim his weapon, but his hands shook violently. The Vorak stepped forward calmly. Confident. It understood fear. It fed on it. Then a loud metallic clang echoed across the desert. The creature stopped, far beyond the crash site. Sparks burst beneath an old cargo hauler where a man lay half underneath the engine assembly. Elias Vance slammed a wrench against a damaged fuel pipe. Come on, he muttered. Work with me here. The colony sirens continued wailing overhead. Elias ignored them. Grease covered his arms while tools lay scattered around the junkyard. Nearby, a small service android balanced nervously atop a crate. Emergency evacuation remains advised, the android said. Survival probability outside secure shelters continues decreasing. Elias tightened another bolt. Everything on this moon decreases survival probability. A terrified miner suddenly sprinted into the junkyard. Elias, the man shouted breathlessly. Security teams are getting slaughtered. Elias slid out from beneath the hauler. By what? I don't know. Some giant creature from the crashed ship. The ground trembled faintly. The miner looked close to panic. People are saying it kills entire platoons. Elias grabbed a welding torch from his toolbox. Yeah, he replied calmly. So does bad reactor maintenance. The miner stared at him in disbelief. Then came a growl. Low, deep, close. Chains hanging from nearby, cranes rattled softly. The android's sensors brightened instantly. Large hostile life form detected. Between towering piles of scrap metal, the Vorak appeared. Up close, it looked even worse. Its shoulders nearly reached the height of the cargo hauler. Muscles shifted beneath armored skin like moving steel cables while blood dripped from its jaws onto the sand. The miner screamed and ran immediately. Elias stayed where he was. The Vorak tilted its head slightly. Confused. No fear sent. No paralysis. The human simply squinted at it like an inconvenient repair problem. Well, Elias sighed, that's unpleasant. The creature lunged. Elias reacted instantly. He fired the welding torch directly into its face. White sparks exploded across the Vorak's eyes as it roared furiously. Elias dove beneath a suspended loader crane and slammed his fist against a control panel. 7, he shouted. The android activated the magnetic release. Massive scrap containers crashed downward. The Vorak smashed through the first impact effortlessly, but twisted metal buried its rear legs beneath debris. Elias sprinted toward another control switch. Industrial chains launched from nearby cranes, wrapping tightly around the creature's torso. For 3 seconds, the Vorak was trapped. Then it roared. The chains snapped apart like thread. Steel links exploded through the junkyard, while the creature tore free from the wreckage. Dust swirled between man and monster. The Vorak stared directly at Elias now. Not angry, curious, as if trying to understand what stood before it. Elias slowly picked up another welding tool. All right, he muttered. You're definitely above my pay grade. The creature suddenly turned and vanished into the darkness beyond the junkyard. Silence returned. Far away, screams echoed across the colony. The Vorak was hunting. Elias grabbed his tool belt and started walking toward the distant fires. 7 followed nervously. You intend to pursue the apex predator? Elias cracked his neck. Yep. Why? A grim smile crossed the mechanic's face. Because somebody has to fix its attitude. Fear is a weapon. The underground bunker shook as another explosion echoed somewhere above the colony. Dust drifted from the ceiling while frightened civilians crowded beneath flickering emergency lights. Children cried softly beside exhausted miners. An armed guard stood near the blast doors gripping rifles with trembling hands. Nobody felt safe anymore. Not after the Vorak. At the center of the command room, Captain Lyra's son replayed security footage from the junkyard battle. The recording showed the creature tearing through steel containers while industrial chains snapped apart beneath impossible strength. Then came a strange part. A lone mechanic charging directly at it with a welding torch. Lyra paused the video on Elias Vance mid-sprint. He should be dead, one officer muttered. No argument there. Elias replied from behind them. Everyone turned sharply. The mechanic walked into the bunker, carrying a metal toolbox beneath one arm. Grease stained his clothes, and a fresh cut crossed his cheek from flying debris. Yet somehow, he looked more annoyed than frightened. Lyra folded her arms. You fought it alone. Temporarily. That thing wiped out an entire security squad. Elias set the toolbox onto the command table. To be fair, they handled it badly. Several guards stared at him in disbelief. One finally asked what everyone was thinking. How are you not terrified? Elias paused for a moment. Outside, a distant roar echoed faintly through the bunker walls. His expression hardened slightly. Who says I'm not? Silence followed. The answer unsettled them more than arrogance would have. Lyra activated the holographic projector above the table. A rotating image of the Vorak appeared in red light. This creature isn't just a predator, she explained quietly. It's a bioweapon engineered during the Sovereign Wars. Archived footage flashed across the display. Burning cities, destroyed fleets, entire military divisions retreating in panic. The Vorak were designed to break civilizations psychologically before physical combat even began, Lyra continued. They emit a neurological fear response that overwhelms most intelligent species. A nervous miner frowned. Then why didn't it work on him? Lyra looked toward Elias. Humans evolved differently. Elias leaned against the wall. That's a polite way to say we're stubborn. 7 rolled into the room, carrying spare fuel cells. Historical records confirm humans possess abnormally high tolerance for stress exposure. Elias nodded proudly. See? Professional opinion. Lyra ignored him. Humans still feel fear. But unlike most species, their nervous systems adapted to functioning through fear instead of shutting down. The room quieted. For most intelligent life, fear ended conflict before it began. Humans apparently treated fear like an inconvenience. Suddenly, warning alarms screamed across the bunker. Power grid breach detected, an operator shouted. The colony map flashed red. Lyra cursed softly. It's heading for the reactor district. Elias immediately grabbed his toolbox. You're going after it? Lyra asked. Yep. With what exactly? Elias opened the box. Inside were wires, magnetic clamps, plasma cutters, fuel cells, and several objects that looked dangerously unstable. Improvisation, he answered. Within minutes, the mechanic transformed the maintenance sector into organized chaos. Mining lasers were stripped from excavation rigs and mounted onto cargo loaders. Fuel pipes became makeshift flamethrowers. Repair drones carried explosive charges through maintenance tunnels. The workers watched in disbelief. You're building weapons out of scrap metal, one guard said. Elias tightened a bolt. Humans build weapons out of everything. Seven rolled beside him nervously. Current survival probability remains critically low. Still not zero. That is somehow your definition of optimism. The reactor district burned when they arrived. Shattered defense turrets sparked across the floor, while coolant pipes vented thick clouds of steam into the corridors. Emergency lights flashed through smoke-filled chambers. At the center of the destruction stood the Vorak. The moment Elias saw it, the psychic pressure returned. Fear hit him instantly. His heartbeat accelerated while every survival instinct screamed at him to run. For one brief moment, he understood why entire armies collapsed before this creature. The Vorak sensed his fear. It stepped forward confidently. Certain, predatory. Then Elias lifted a plasma cutter and sighed. Yeah, he muttered. Still ugly. And charged directly at it. Mining lasers erupted from overhead platforms. The Vorak dodged sideways as explosions tore through coolant pipes, flooding the chamber with steam and fire. Elias sprinted through the chaos while drones slammed explosive charges against the creature's armored flank. The Vorak roared furiously. Its claws ripped through steel support beams as it lunged toward him. Elias barely rolled aside before firing magnetic anchors into its shoulder armor. Electrified cables tightened instantly, dragging the creature toward an overloaded reactor pipe. 7. Elias shouted. Detonation sequence armed. Do it. The explosion shook the entire district. Molten metal burst across the chamber, while the Vorak slammed into a reinforced wall hard enough to crack the plating. Then came something impossible. The creature screamed in pain. Dark blood dripped from a deep wound across its armored shoulder. Silence spread through the reactor sector. The Vorak slowly lifted its head and stared directly at Elias. Not with rage, with confusion. It had hunted soldiers, conquerors, entire civilizations. But never something like this. A fragile species that kept fighting even while afraid. The creature backed slowly into the smoke-filled darkness, then disappeared. Elias leaned heavily against the damaged console, breathing hard. Lyra arrived moments later with armed survivors behind her. She froze when she saw the blood staining the floor. You wounded it, she whispered. Nobody in recorded history had ever survived long enough to do that. Elias glanced toward the darkness where the Vorak vanished. Turns out, he said tiredly, everything breaks eventually. The human problem. Morning arrived over Kepri, 9 beneath a sky choked with smoke. Half the colony lay in ruins. Burned vehicles blocked the streets while emergency crews dragged twisted metal away from collapsed buildings. The survivors moved quietly now, speaking in hushed voices as if loud sounds might attract the creature waiting somewhere beyond the dunes. The Vorak had changed the colony. People no longer believed walls could protect them. Inside the main workshop bunker, Sparks showered across the floor as Elias Vance welded armor, plating onto a dismantled mining exosuit. The machine looked terrible. One arm ended in a massive industrial drill, while exposed hydraulic tubes hung from the torso frame. Mismatched steel plates covered the cockpit like patchwork armor. Captain Lyra stared at it uncertainly. That thing can barely stand. Elias tightened another bolt. That's why I relate to it. You're planning to fight the Vorak in construction equipment. I'm planning to hit it very hard with construction equipment. 7 rolled past, carrying ammunition crates. Current probability of catastrophic mechanical failure has reached 89%. Elias nodded approvingly. Excellent. Double digits. Lyra rubbed her tired eyes. You almost died yesterday. Almost dying builds experience. That isn't how survival works. That explains why humans survive differently. Outside the bunker, warning sirens echoed faintly through the colony. Another supply station had gone dark during the night. Communication relays continued failing one by one. The Vorak was hunting carefully now. Strategically, Lyra activated the colony map. Red warning symbols spread across the outer sectors like infection. It's adapting, she said quietly. Elias climbed partially into the exosuit cockpit. Yep, you say that like it's normal. It is normal. Predators learn. This thing disabled our communications before attacking. Smart predator. Lyra stared at him in frustration. Why does none of this seem to disturb you? For once, Elias stopped working. The workshop fell quiet except for the hiss of leaking hydraulics. Everything about this disturbs me, he answered calmly. Difference is, panicking won't help. The words lingered heavily in the room. Most intelligent species treated fear as a warning to retreat. Humans often treated it as motivation. A nervous colony officer entered carrying an old military datapad. Captain, you should see this. Ancient combat footage flickered across the workshop screen. Entire alien battalions fled from charging Voraks without firing a single shot. Soldiers collapsed, trembling, while psychic terror overwhelmed them completely. One warning repeated throughout every classified report. Do not engage. Lyra looked toward Elias. The mechanic was currently kicking the exosuit because the left leg refused to move properly. The officer lowered his voice. Why is he still willing to fight it? Lyra watched Elias wrench open a control panel with bare hands. Because humans normalize danger, she answered quietly. Suddenly the bunker lights died. Darkness swallowed the workshop. A second later, emergency systems activated in dim red flashes. Seven's optical sensors brightened immediately. Alert! Multiple colony defenses offline. Then came the roar. Close. Very close. A massive impact shook the bunker walls as screams erupted somewhere above ground. The Vorak had entered the colony again. Elias sealed the exosuit cockpit instantly. Hydraulic systems groaned alive while the machine rose unsteadily onto its feet. The entire suit rattled like it might collapse at any second. Perfect. Lyra grabbed a rifle from the weapons rack. I'm coming with you. No, you can't stop it alone. Probably not. Then why go? Elias paused near the bunker doors. Because if it reaches the shelters, people die. Simple. No speech. No heroics. He opened the blast doors and stepped into chaos. The colony streets burned beneath flashing emergency lights. Civilians ran between damaged buildings while security teams fired desperately into drifting smoke. Then the Vorak appeared. It burst through a transport station like a living nightmare, black armor glistening beneath firelight. Massive claws tore through defensive barricades effortlessly while psychic terror flooded the street. Several guards dropped their weapons immediately. Others ran. The Vorak roared triumphantly, and a cargo hauler slammed directly into its side. Elias charged forward inside the mining exosuit, metal footsteps shaking the ground. Itchy Y, he shouted through external speakers. The creature turned instantly. Elias fired magnetic chain launchers mounted beneath the exosuit arms. Thick industrial cables wrapped around the Vorak before anchoring into nearby structures. The beast snarled and pulled violently. Buildings cracked under the strain. Elias pushed the exosuit engines harder while warning alarms screamed through the cockpit. Containment pressure failing, Seven warned over comms. Yeah, I noticed. The Vorak lunged despite the chains. Its claws tore through the exosuit's shoulder, ripping away armor plating in a shower of sparks. Pain exploded through Elias's ribs as the cockpit slammed sideways into a wall. Most species would have stopped fighting. Humans were stubborn. Elias activated the mining drill. The massive industrial bit slammed into the Vorak's armored chest at full speed, driving both of them backward through a collapsing fuel depot. Fire erupted everywhere. The Vorak roared furiously. Then suddenly, silence. Its glowing eyes locked onto Elias through shattered cockpit glass. The psychic connection struck instantly. Images flooded his mind. Burning worlds, broken armies, entire civilizations surrendering beneath fear. The Vorak's existence revolved around dominance through terror. Then it touched the human mind fully and found something horrifying. Pain endured without surrender. Fear carried forward instead of obeyed. Grief transformed into determination. Humanity surviving impossible odds simply because it refused to quit. The Vorak recoiled violently. For the first time in its existence, the apex predator felt fear. Elias smiled through blood running down his face. Yeah, he whispered. Now you understand the problem. No fear. The evacuation ships never came. High above Kepri, 9 military cruisers remained safely in orbit while automated transmissions repeated across emergency channels. Planetary threat level exceeds acceptable deployment risk. To the survivors trapped below, it sounded like abandonment. Inside the damaged command bunker, silence filled the air between exhausted civilians and wounded guards. Emergency lights flickered weakly while dust drifted from cracked ceilings. Nobody spoke much anymore. The Vorak had broken something deeper than defenses. It had broken hope. Captain Lyra stood over the tactical display, studying the colony map. Nearly half the settlement was gone. Entire sectors had fallen silent overnight. It's circling the shelters, she said quietly. Testing our defenses. Across the room, Elias Vance tightened the final bolts on his ruined exosuit. The machine barely resembled functional equipment anymore. One arm was missing completely. Burn marks covered the cockpit plating while hydraulic fluid leaked steadily onto the floor. Still usable. Probably. Seven scanned the suit carefully. Structural integrity remains critically unstable. Elias climbed into the cockpit. That's machine language for enthusiastic. You are suffering internal injuries. Also enthusiastic. Good thing the suit does most of the standing. This isn't a repair problem anymore, Elias. That finally made him pause. For the first time since the nightmare began, the mechanic looked genuinely exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes beneath streaks of grease and dry blood. Outside, a distant roar echoed through the desert. The Vorak was close. Lyra lowered her voice. You can't beat that thing. Elias sealed the cockpit shut with a metallic hiss. Wasn't planning to beat it. The exosuit powered on unevenly. Hydraulics groaned while damaged servos struggled to move. Planning to outlast it, the abandoned planetary shipyard stretched across the northern desert beneath cold moonlight. Rusted cargo vessels rested in endless rows, while towering construction cranes loomed over drifting sand. Perfect battlefield. Elias walked alone through the wreckage while wind carried dust around the damaged exosuit. Hours earlier, he had rewired the entire shipyard. Fuel systems, cargo rails, magnetic cranes, reactor conduits. Humans possessed a dangerous talent for turning ordinary environments into weapons, especially mechanics. Seven's voice crackled through the comm system. Motion detected. The darkness shifted. The Vorak emerged silently between two ruined freighters. Even wounded, it looked terrifying. Black armored hide reflected moonlight across deep battle scars while glowing eyes remained fixed on Elias with careful intelligence. Neither moved. Then the psychic pressure returned. Fear crashed into Elias instantly. His heartbeat accelerated while every instinct screamed at him to run. The Vorak sensed it immediately, because fear was its greatest weapon. Every species eventually surrendered to it. But humans were strange. Fear did not always stop them. Sometimes it pushed them forward. Elias exhaled slowly inside the cockpit. "Yeah," he muttered, still ugly. Then he hit the detonator. The shipyard exploded into chaos. Fuel lines erupted into towering fireballs while magnetic cranes swung downward like giant steel hammers. Cargo containers crashed from overhead rails as shockwaves rolled across the desert. The Vorak lunged through the destruction. Elias charged directly at it. The damaged exosuit slammed into the creature while its remaining drill arm hammered against armored hide. Sparks and blood exploded across the battlefield. The Vorak roared furiously and struck back. Claws tore through the exosuit torso. Warning alarms screamed. Hydraulic systems failed instantly. Pain shot through Elias's chest hard enough to blur his vision. Still, he kept fighting. "Reactor overload sequence ready," 7 reported. "Not yet," Elias growled. The Vorak attacked relentlessly, smashing through burning wreckage while Elias baited it deeper into the reactor sector. Every step triggered another trap. Coolant pipes burst into freezing vapor. Electromagnetic anchors fired from hidden launchers. Collapsing platforms crashed around them. But the Vorak adapted constantly, learning, surviving, exactly like humans. Finally, the creature cornered Elias beside the central reactor chamber. The exosuit died completely. Power failed. Weapons offline. The cockpit split open as Elias collapsed heavily onto the platform below. Blood spread beneath him while reactor alarms echoed through the chamber. The Vorak approached slowly, victorious, yet uncertain, because the human still wasn't retreating. Elias forced himself upright against the reactor controls. "Took you long enough," he muttered. The creature entered his mind one final time, and there it finally understood humanity. Humans did feel fear, deeply, constantly, but they evolved on a violent world where survival demanded persistence through terror, pain, and impossible odds. Fear became something endured instead of obeyed. That realization horrified the Vorak, because every species it had hunted eventually surrendered. Humans didn't, even broken, even dying. They kept moving forward. The Vorak hesitated, and that hesitation killed it. 7, Elias whispered. Inside the control tower overlooking the chamber, the small service android looked toward him through shattered glass. "Always an honor, Elias." The reactor doors slammed shut around the Vorak. Massive magnetic locks engaged instantly. The creature roared violently as the overloaded reactor core reached critical levels. 7 pressed the final activation switch. White light consumed the shipyard. The explosion shook the desert for kilometers. Hours later, rescue crews found Elias buried beneath twisted debris far from the blast zone. Broken ribs, severe burns, enough injuries to kill most species several times over. Yet somehow alive. The Vorak never emerged from the reactor ruins. Months later, Kepri, 9 slowly rebuilt beneath calmer skies. Trade ships returned cautiously. New walls rose from the sand. And inside a noisy repair garage near the docks, Elias Vance crawled beneath another broken cargo hauler while muttering angrily at faulty engine wiring, as if none of it had happened. Across the galaxy, however, one warning spread rapidly through military channels. "If humans stop being afraid of you, run."